Welcome back to Radio Entrepreneurs. I'm Jonathan Freedman, and our next guest is the one, the only Marc Z with a Marc Z Legal Moment. Welcome, Marc. Always good to have you on.
Thank you, John. Great to be here as always and talk about topical subjects that are going to be important to our listeners and as we continue to move forward in 2025.
You're always the guy that brings us lots of topical subjects. What do you have for today?
So, what I thought I would talk about is pay transparency. Now, in Massachusetts, we've had pay transparency for a while. Where what pay transparency is that employers have to talk about what a position is going to pay, or at least the range of the pay. And that way, the person who's applying for the position or is under consideration for the position will know what the position pays. And the reason
So,
why,
so that has to be disclosed up front as opposed to having the discussion saying what was your last salary, just for clarity.
correct. Well, that has been in the state of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts for a long time, as well as nationally, where you can no longer ask somebody what they're making or their salary history. What pay transparency is that when you're looking to place a job and you're recruiting for that job as an employer, you have to disclose what that position will pay, and that way the person who's whether applying or under consideration for the position will know this is the salary range of the job. And the reason why that was started was that there were a lot of employees, particularly female employees, that would come in at a salary that was substantially or sometimes even at a different level than a male counterpart with the same level of experience. And this way would it sort of evens the playing field, and anybody who's under consideration will understand based on their experience, based on a set amount of factors, they'll be having a certain pay range to be able to count on that.
Well, it's interesting, and I'll debate that because I think it's fascinating to say that it's based on a range of experience, but experience sometimes can sway, what a starting salary might be. I think what they're trying to do is really establish a position is worth X, so it's relative to the position. You
Right,
can have somebody with, just for discussion's sake, 2 years of experience and somebody with 20 years of experience in the same position, and they can bring very different things to the table.
right.
Yet we're trying to say that a position is only worth X. So it's an interesting concept. I understand what the intent is. It certainly seems to present challenges from the employer perspective. Just as I said, if you have an employee with you have a role. And you may say, I want somebody with 5 years experience, but you get somebody with 20, they may be worth more than somebody with 5 years of experience. That's the challenge, I think, for employer,
Right.
as I see
Well,
it.
that's what the role will pay.
Yeah.
And that way somebody because what happens is there is pay discrepancy
Mhm.
often in the past when you've had female and male employees in just the studies and the surveys that were done. And that
Yeah.
way candidates would be able to understand what the position is worth prior to applying. And obviously, what is considered experience, what would be the differential in terms of the salary range. There are a lot of factors, but at least it levels the playing field. The other interesting part is Massachusetts was ahead of this. Only recently have states like New York and California come onto the scene, and it's growing. It's not in terms of different states, but not every state has one of the pay transparency acts that where employees would be able to see that. And what's interesting is a lot of companies or firms have offices around the country. So
Right.
even though in their regular location, they do not have to put a salary range, if they're in a market where the state has a law for that, like say New York or Massachusetts, then they would have to establish a range. So it's very
So,
interesting.
so it's as long as they operate in that state as opposed to having the position being in the state. So, if in your example, if a firm has offices in New York and XYZ state. As long as they operate in New York, they need to have transparency in the state that they don't.
From what I understand, if you're operating a business and you're advertising or posting for a position in that jurisdiction that has the Pay Transparency Act, then you have to operate under those laws. It's
So
like
it does not eliminate the capability of putting a salary range in place, correct? So you can have a
um,
range of salary.
that's what a lot of companies are doing and a lot of firms are doing. They're having a salary range
And
because a lot of
is there any definition of what that range needs to be? I guess one way around it is to put an incredibly large range for a salary, and sort of create a little bit of a loophole. But I don't know if that would pass muster either.
right. I mean, I think again, the employee has to really check with the employer in terms of what the position would pay if but obviously when it's posted, like for example, when we see positions that are posted, sometimes there's a salary range, sometimes there's a set salary max, like that this is going to be going to at least this amount, but generally what we're seeing are salary ranges.
Yeah,
So
I think it, certainly understand the reasoning behind it. It creates a little bit of a challenge, but again, the loophole of being able to provide a range at least gets people, and I think on both sides, it prevents a lot of, shall I say, going down the path when you're not even in the same ballpark. And I think a lot of recruiting efforts can sometimes look to go quite well. And then late in the initial phases, anyways, you have a discussion around salary and you find out you're nowhere near the same range. And so you've wasted a whole bunch of time on both sides. So
right, no,
hopefully
that's
it prevents some of that as well.
right. No, you hope to prevent that as well. But the other thing is, what we've always said to our client companies and firms, pay what the position will pay. Don't pay what the person will accept. And
Mhm.
that's the other thing. A lot of employers, until they've had certain benchmarks in place or laws in place, have looked at somebody's salary history and then made an offer based on what the person would accept, or based on a bump over what the person was getting in their previous salary. Now the focus is on what the person
What the
would
role is and what the
right.
role is and
Well,
what the role pays. Yeah,
right,
and again, I think that presents challenges for small companies and perhaps entrepreneurs who haven't had anybody in that role. So it sort of
right,
I guess forces you to do a little bit of homework and understand the marketplace and what the role is worth. And obviously today there's a lot more tools and a lot more data out there that will give you some context on what a role might be worth.
correct. I mean, a lot of employers have surveys, and they'll look historically at other information that they receive from different sources to try to come up with a salary or compensation plan that would work for somebody in that role.
Yeah, and it's
But it's
interesting too because I think some of the challenge in that also is there's so many variables that go into making that determination. You can in this area you can have a drastic difference in a salary for the same role in let's call it a 50-mile radius because of
right,
cost of living, but also size of the firm can have a dramatic impact. You can have two titles that are similar, but
right,
the responsibilities and the the role can be substantially different in a very small company versus a large company. So it's
right,
like with everything, it tries to fix on one side we got the yin and we try and fix something, and on the other hand we got the yang that makes it complicated to fix what we're trying to fix in a simplified way. So
right,
um,
right. No, it's a whole process, and I know employers are looking at ways to better recruit qualified candidates and provide the best compensation, and at the same time stay within the boundaries of what's required under state law and what's going to attract the top talent. And not only that, which is time for another show, but you have a whole bonus plan and all other incentives with 401ks and matching and ways that to attract top talent. but it will start with having a pay range that's competitive and that will work within the particular market. And even if there's no Pay Transparency Act, you want to have a range that works to attract that top talent.
Absolutely. Always bringing us topical and timely information and guidance, Mark. If people want to learn more, people want to talk about it, you've got candidates that might want to reach out to you. What's the best way for them to reach out to you?
Well, first of all, John, go on our wonderful Radio Entrepreneurs website, radioentrepreneurs.com. Google Marc Z, M-A-R-C, and the letter Z, marczlegal.com, marczlegal.com, and 617-338-1300.
This has been a Marc Z Moment, brought to you by Marc Z, president of Marc Z Legal Staffing. It's always a pleasure talking with you, Mark. Thanks for coming on Radio Entrepreneurs this morning.
Thank you, John.
And we'll be right back with another segment on Radio Entrepreneurs.